Well, today is just a wonderful day, first of all. And it's so good that I'm not dressed like a slob for the first time on the air. That's how important today is. It's been nearly 50 years since Roe v. Wade was decided. For half a century, we've lived under its tyranny. Those of us who were lucky enough to live at all, that is, actually, because 60 million of us did not live. Over 60 million human children have been wiped off the face of the earth during that time, executed one by one, systematically, for profit. All because 9 guys in robes pulled out their decoder rings from their Cracker Jack boxes and found the right to abortion written in invisible ink somewhere in the document. And that was enough justification to legalize the destruction of innocent human life all across the country for almost half a century. It's impossible to know what our society deprived itself of, what it sacrificed, aside from its soul. Could one of the babies we killed have come up with a cure for cancer? Could there have been great leaders and artists and thinkers and humanitarians somewhere in that pile of bodies? Almost certainly there were. How many inventors and pioneers were thrown into the mass grave before they even had a chance to speak, to plead for themselves, to tell their side of the story? We'll never know for sure because Roe robbed us of that, just as it robbed 60 million children of their lives and of their potential. Until today. As expected for the last month and prayed for and fought for and worked towards for the last 5 decades by pro-lifers, Roe was officially overturned by the Supreme Court decision today. A decision originally leaked a few weeks ago in a desperate bid to intimidate at least one of the justices into changing their minds. The gambit did not pay off. Indeed, it probably backfired as Chief Justice Roberts joined the majority decision overturning Roe, something he almost certainly was not planning to do until the decision leaked. And so it stands. It stands even stronger, arguably, than it did in its leaked form. And the result is that Roe is no more. Praise God. This is truly one of the greatest days in American history. Future generations will look back on this day. You are living in a day right now. You are experiencing a day that will be in the history books and that future generations will look back on. And they will look back on it the way that we now look back on the abolition of slavery or the defeat of the Germans in World War II, the liberation of the concentration camps. They will look back on it in the exact same way. Because there's a lot of gray area in life. There's many occasions where the good guys aren't very distinguishable from the bad guys. But this belongs to the other category of events. This is the category where the line between good and evil could not be more clear. One side has fought to protect babies from extermination. And they have fought this and fought for this for the sake of those babies, of those children. We pro-lifers, we stand to gain nothing personally from the end of Roe. We don't profit off of it in any way at all. There's nothing self-serving about it. We fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. And this is really hard for the left to understand because they never do this. Everything they fight for, it's always for themselves. Always. If they cannot directly profit from it in some kind of way, they do not fight for it and they do not care. Which is why they could never understand us. They never understood us as pro-lifers. They're always looking for what's really going on here. What's going on below the surface? What's the nefarious plan? They're trying to control women's bodies. They have a secret conspiracy. It's none of that. We just don't think you should kill babies. Simple as that. We care about those babies. The other side, they fight to destroy innocent life. And they fight for it for their own sake, for their own convenience, for their own precious lifestyle and comfort. They're the bad guys. History will see them as the bad guys. We'll see them that way. We'll look back on them with scorn. And you should know that also. If you're on the left and today you're very upset and you're screaming and crying about it, that all of history will look back at you and with scorn and mockery and derision. As well they should. Because you lose. You lose big today. You lose historically. And look, they're going to explode in demonic rage. They're going to protest and riot. They will destroy and probably kill to satiate their bloodlust. But none of that will change anything. And all of it will be worth it in the end. Let these psychopaths burn every city to the ground. I will still thank God that Roe is no more. Now, I don't think they're actually going to follow through on a lot of this stuff. I think a lot of it is just big talk. I think that the pro-abortion militants are hoping and praying to Satan that will have, the BLM riots of 2020 all over again, that will have months and months of chaos and rioting in the street. That's what they're hoping for. That's what they're trying to organize. I don't think it's actually going to happen. Because I don't think that there are enough people, and maybe I'll be proven wrong about this. I don't think there are enough people who care that much about killing babies to generate the kind of mass nationwide chaos that the left is hoping for here. We'll see. Now, this does not end the scourge of abortion. We should note that. It may come as a shock to many of the pro-abortion demons convulsing in the street and vomiting all over themselves like Linda Blair in The Exorcist. But in fact, abortion will remain legal in many U.S. states, including our most populous states. In fact, nearly every pro-abortion militant now promising a night of rage as revenge actually lives in a place where their so-called right to abortion, quote unquote, will remain intact. Actually, I expect that the remaining abortion states will double and triple down, consoling themselves by making abortion even more accessible, even more legal, even more easy to obtain. I'm putting my marker down right here. I don't think this year will come to a close before at least one state officially legalizes infanticide, expanding abortion rights into the first several months of a child's life outside the womb. That's on the way. And yet, even so, this decision today will nonetheless directly save millions of lives. There is no question about that. It is not every day that something like this happens, that there's an event in history that happens and we live through it. And because of that event, millions of people will live who otherwise would have died. I mean, the course of history has been changed in ways that we cannot possibly tabulate or quantify, and we never will be able to. It's important also to note something else, that this decision made by the court is not just morally right, though it is, of course, morally right, manifestly and self-evidently so. It's also the right legal decision. Because even if somehow you have no moral qualms with the dismemberment of children, you must, if you're honest and understand the way the law is supposed to work, you must agree that Roe was bad law, bad precedent, a bad decision built on a foundation so flimsy that to call it merely flimsy probably does it a favor. I want to read a little bit from the decision itself today. It says, quote, "Without any grounding in the constitutional text, history, or precedent, Roe imposed on the entire country a detailed set of rules for pregnancy divided into trimesters, much like those that one might expect to find in a statute or regulation. Roe's failure even to note the overwhelming consensus of state laws in effect in 1868 is striking. And what it said about the common law was simply wrong. Then, after surveying history, the opinion spent many paragraphs conducting the sort of fact-finding that might be undertaken by a legislative committee and did not explain why the sources on which it relies shed light on the meaning of the Constitution. As to precedent, citing a broad array of cases, the court found support for a constitutional right of personal privacy. But Roe conflated the right to shield information from disclosure and the right to make and implement personal decisions without governmental interference. None of these decisions involved what is distinctive about abortion, its effect on what Roe termed potential life. When the court summarized the basis for the scheme it imposed on the country, it asserted that its rules were consistent with, among other things, the relative weight of the respective interests involved in the demands of the profound problems of the present day. These are precisely the sort of considerations that legislative bodies often take into account when they draw lines that accommodate competing interests. The scheme produced looked like legislation, and the court provided the sort of explanation that might be expected from a legislative body." Okay, now, the entire decision is very much worth reading, but that passage alone summarizes, I think, a central element of the majority's decision. Basically, to translate, the decision to affirm a constitutional right to abortion, quote unquote, was not grounded in the text of the Constitution, because it's not in the text of the Constitution. It wasn't even grounded in precedent or historical tradition. It had no grounding at all, aside from the claims and preferences of the justices who decided it. What they came up with then was not a legal decision rigorously argued, but a kind of pseudo-legislation that looks and sounds and functions like something that a legislative committee might come up with. And that's reason enough to overturn it, no matter how you feel about abortion. And you can really see the contrast between Roe itself, that decision, and the decision abolishing it today. The latter, the decision abolishing it, is thorough, logical, deeply argued, While the former was shallow, often absurd, full of subjective assertions, and it danced around and avoided the fundamental question, which of course is what we always find on the left. They could never take any issue head on. They can never talk about it directly. Everything is covered in euphemism. Everything is just a game of beating around the bush. Because here is the most fundamental question that all pro-abortion people everywhere avoid. It's the question that the rioters in the street tonight, while they're looting and burning, will have no answer to and probably haven't even thought about, and that is this. What is a person? We know they can't tell us what a woman is, which won't stop them from claiming that today represents a grave assault on women's rights. But that confusion is not surprising since they, long before, gave up on the definition of the word person. I mean, before they gave up on the definition of the word woman, they'd given up on the definition of the word person, which means that we had already become these kinds of sort of vague, hazy, ambiguous, undefinable, undefined lumps of matter. You know, that's what a person is now. It's like nothing at all. And of course, if that's the case, then any other label you put on the person also doesn't really make any sense because we don't know anything about the underlying person. For 50 years, they claimed that the question is irrelevant. They said, well, nobody knows what a person is. It's impossible to say, so let's just keep killing these babies just in case. But any morally sane person realizes that it should go the other way. If you can't tell me what a person is, then you can't say for certain that the child in the womb is not one, which means even by your own logic, you should refrain from killing him. If you point a gun at somebody, not knowing if it's loaded or not, and you pull the trigger, you're still legally liable if it turns out there was a bullet in the chamber after all. Unless your name is Alec Baldwin, of course. The same goes for abortion. By the pro-abort's own telling, they exterminated 60 million human children who might have been people for all they know. That's not any better than exterminating 60 million human children who you know are people. Especially in this case. Because in fact, everyone knows that babies are people. Even if they pretend to be confused about it. Everyone knows it. A person is a human being. The child in the womb cannot be anything other than a member of the human species, which means he cannot be anything other than a person. These are people. They have been killing people, millions of them, and they know it. And they'll answer to God for what they've done. But today, we celebrate their defeat. There's a lot of work yet to be done. The battle is just beginning in many ways. But I think it's very important to celebrate the victories when they come. And this is a victory. I mean, this is a major one. This is one of the greatest victories for human rights in the history of the world. I think I would even say perhaps the greatest victory for human rights in the history of the world. And it's one that I thought I would never live to see. In summation, what a great way to end Pride Month. Hey, I know you're craving some more Matt Walsh Show content. Well, I have some great news for you. If you head over to dailywire.com and subscribe now, you can watch or listen to my full show. You can also listen to my podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'll see you there.